This channel is made possible by viewers like you. My viewers, subscribers, and patrons greatly help to keep this channel going. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for all of you. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any uploads. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, please check out my Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you'll get access to what I'm working on, previews of upcoming content, and even early videos, along with other tier options for those that are interested. Thank you, and now on to the video. Sony entered the gaming scene with their PlayStation launch in Japan in late 1994, and then later in America in September the following year. Looking back on the console, certain games and characters jump out to audiences that instantly make us think of PlayStation. Crash Bandicoot and Spyro are the two big ones that might jump out to you, but during this time, Sony was exploring using their internal studios to find and establish mascots. This would help to cement their brand by having various characters and games connected only to Sony's PlayStation. Sadly, this also meant that there would be a fair share of failed or forgotten mascots that never really managed to get off the ground. Blasto is one such character and game that Sony was banking on to be a continuing presence. They even had the great Phil Hartman voicing him, so what could go wrong? Unfortunately, Blasto is a title that had a very tough development cycle. The team faced pressure from Sony management, along with needing to contend with deaths that affected the making of the game, along with its release. At the same time, Blasto does have its fair share of charm, and especially heart. I present to you the tragedy of Blasto. Sony wanted mascots for the new PlayStation, and they especially wanted them developed by one of their internal teams. So one team aimed to make a fully 3D game with platforming elements found in the likes of Mario and Tomb Raider. This was going to be a sci-fi title, and the studio discussed which direction to go in. Should they pursue something with a dark tone, where the player is trying to blow everything up, or do they attempt to go down a path with more personality and potentially depth? This is where Captain Blasto began to take shape. Blasto would be both the title of the game and the star of the adventure. Inspiration for Blasto came from all over. He was a parody of superhero characters of sorts. One of the developers said he was a combination of James Bond, Inspector Clouseau, and Flash Gordon. Others even cited Duck Dodgers as well. As a result, Blasto would take on a more cartoony visual design, something to match the humorous tone and personality of its characters and world. The developers worked to weave humor throughout the entire game, even down to the idle animations that Blasto would perform, like pulling his spandex out of his butt. And of course, he would have plenty of one-liners and catchphrases. The team had a goal in mind that they wanted to achieve: prove that they could have a huge 3D game with no loading in time. Sure, there would be loading for individual levels, but the stages would be fairly large in scope for the time, and once a player was in a level, there would be no loading. Conceptually, the player would be able to go from the beginning to the end of the level, with no loading happening throughout. These massive levels were ambitious, and caused the developers to think about how to craft them that would not cause the player to become lost in them. So as part of the design, the team ensured that stages would have a hierarchy of goals presented to the player, so that the player would know what they need to do and be directed towards the action. They wanted the player to be able to pick up Blasto and get instant gratification from it. To prevent aimless walking, puzzles and tasks would be there to help focus up the action and keep the player entertained. This platformer shooter was beginning to take shape and was looking to be a title to pay attention to for PlayStation fans.
Space Command Central to Captain Blasto. Space Command Central to Captain Blasto, over.
Blasto here.
You have an urgent message from Admiral Big Shot on your main viewer.
Urgent, huh? Put him through, Command Central.
Blasto, Uranus is in big trouble.
What did I do this time?
This is no time for jokes. It seems that evil alien tyrant Bosk is up to his old tricks again.
Bosk? I thought that pear-headed psychopath was banished to the 5th dimension.
He was.
Blasto would be a platformer shooter. He could jump, back up, and even sidestep. The sidestep would become crucial to deploy while in firefights, as it was the best means to dodge enemy fire. Blasto would always be armed with his blaster, and this could also be upgraded through pickups, along with being able to fire off a charge shot. Various weapons would be scattered about the levels, from rocket launchers, flamethrowers, machine guns, and a lot more. Other tools would be at the player's disposal, like a jetpack to aid with the platforming and combat. The team was shooting to have enemy AI that would be more advanced than what the player might initially expect. For example, enemies could signal to each other, and even display varying degrees of courage, with one deciding to shoot the player, and another choosing to run away. Oddly enough, choosing to not kill certain enemies may even open up secret areas for the player. The narrative would center around a conflict between Blasto and Bosk. After returning from the 5th dimension, the tyrant Bosk would be completely focused on conquering the planet Uranus. Bosk launches an invasion, and Blasto is called into action. His objective: stop the invasion, save all the space babes, and protect Uranus. The developers had their story and gameplay they wanted. They even had many of the lines that they wanted to use by their lead character. But they needed the right voice, and this is where Phil Hartman entered the picture.
I'm back, but this time I brought a friend with me. Let me introduce you to Mr. Fission Blaster. If this doesn't kill you, I'm yours on a sesame bun. Ouch, I'd say mankind is up crap creek without a spooge hammer. And now I've got to clean it up. Uranus is littered with extra crispy bad guys. You might want to send somebody up there to hose the planet down. Either that or have a bake sale.
Phil's son was a huge PlayStation fan. The development team easily landed on Phil for the voice of Blasto. It was who they pictured in their head, and would love to have him as that part for their project. Sony management reached out to Phil, and then Phil signed a contract, and ended up wanting to do the project for his son. So now the team had their Blasto, and they recorded 8 hours of lines. Like I said before, they had many of the lines that they wanted, and they even hired on an Emmy award-winning writer to improve much of the writing. But much of the team cited it was Hartman who managed to have all of it come together. Lines that even the team thought were not the best turned into hits because of what Hartman was able to do with them. His comedic delivery was on full display, and he had everyone laughing at the studio. As some of the developers said, Phil could just talk and everyone would just start laughing. Now, just like with any game development, there's always interesting features or ideas that were thrown around. For example, Blasto was aiming to have a healthy amount of humor. The development team toyed around with a few ideas for having a more mature option to the game, focused on a more adult audience. In concept, this would mean having a memory card that could be used with the game to unlock more profanity and harsher jokes that wouldn't be allowed in the teen-rated title. So in order to access the more adult Blasto, you needed to have the memory card for it. As the game progressed, the idea was eventually dropped. The developers felt that having a more adult Blasto would not fit the world, nor the character that they truly wanted to have. And through the collaboration of the team, and especially Phil Hartman's delivery, the final game would have much of that humor that they worked so hard to achieve.
Oh, mama! Bambi, good heavens! You can't wear that in this neighborhood!
The Blasto team faced many challenges during their development. They wanted to prove what the PlayStation was capable of, and this was also during the time where gaming was making a big shift from 2D to 3D. It was also during this time where many games were struggling with this transition to do it well. The Blasto team also had a mixture of experienced and inexperienced developers. They needed to get creative and learn to effectively work together. Now, since Sony wanted their mascots, there was a lot of pressure from management on the development team. The spotlight was on them, and as a result, there was less flexibility as the project went along. This resulted in more pressure and time constraints affecting the project. In an interview after the game came out, much of the team cited many of these developmental issues that resulted in levels and elements being forced into the game that weren't fully realized yet, along with cutting levels that were actually 90% complete. Blasto's development saw one of its main producers unexpectedly pass away, and this devastated the team. The team dedicated the game to their friend and wanted to finish the project for him. Sadly, this would not be the only death that would hit the Blasto team. At the time, Blasto was getting a big marketing push from Sony and was going to be shown off at E3. It was then that the news of Phil Hartman's death broke. After this point, the marketing for the game turned into being silent, even on launch day, with Blasto having more of a shadow launch. Sony significantly reduced the marketing because they did not want to appear like they were capitalizing on Hartman's death. Blasto's development is one of a talented group trying to show what the PlayStation was capable of, along with injecting humor and personality from a beloved comedian as their main hero. But this development is also one of tragedy. So what did the critics think about the title when it came out? GameSpot gave it a 4.2 out of 10. The reviewer praises it for the originality and personality that is brought to Blasto, but cites that it fails to bring what made 2D platformers so great into the 3D space. Along with this, many of the enemies are frustrating to fight, which seemed to slowly annoy the reviewer more and more. Generally, the difficulty became too much, and what seemed to be the final nail in the coffin for this person. IGN gave the title a 5 out of 10. They found Blasto as a hero to be generic, the stages depressingly simplistic, and issues with feedback among other complaints. While I have plenty of issues with Blasto myself, I found it interesting to look at what critics thought of it at the time. The IGN review, as a review, is short but fails to really elaborate on why they didn't really like it. I have plenty of issues with Blasto myself, but to call him generic is just incorrect. The character is full of personality with his lines and animations. The GameSpot review is actually pretty good, provides detail to better understand why the reviewer did not enjoy it. The start of the review has a quote that I agree with in some ways. "There's a good game here, it's simply hidden under many layers of frustration. Now as it pertains to my personal feelings with the game, there's a lot to enjoy. Pretty much any time Blasto opens his mouth, you'll have at least a smile on your face, with some really good funny lines as well. This greatly adds a layer of charm, humor, and honestly heart from the delivery of Hartman. The shooting is pretty fun. When many of the game's issues don't creep in, I do like the shooting and jumping around the levels. You get a fun set of guns like rockets, flamethrowers, and a lot more to play around with. It's hard to not mention and praise the soundtrack from Chuck Dowd. Anything he creates is simply amazing, and the dynamic tracks add a cinematic quality to the gameplay. There are some fun secrets, including a humorous secret evil version of yourself. The game just does a poor job of conveying many of these secrets to the player. Without actually having a guide of sorts, it's gonna be hard to find. The first level is a great introduction, but level 2 feels like you are now dropped into level 9, rather than a proper level 2. Some of these levels are simply way too long, to the point that they can feel drawn out and hurt the pacing. I like Blasto, but due to its issues I was never able to beat it. It honestly is a title that could very much benefit from a proper remaster. Sony needs more games like this to help strengthen their current portfolio, and a silly, cartoony, stage-based action platformer would be great. Many of the ideas are good. There's decent bones here, and plus the personality and humor, especially the music, have all aged very well. If the code is still available, I would get a team together to polish up the game, refine and improve it more. Keep all of the voice acting the same, maybe even add in some new lines or provide them as extras if Hartman's recordings are still out there. I have developed a bit of a soft spot for this title, and it is an important part of Sony's history that Sony itself should bring back to get it out there for everyone to try. A remaster would be a great way to honor Hartman along with the original team. Have you played Blasto? Would you be open to a remaster? Let me know in the comments down below. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.